Welcome to the podcast, People More Interesting Than Me. I'm your host, Michael Strumsky, where every week I host a new guest with unique professions, personal adversity, or even maybe a strong opinion or two. And if you haven't hit the 5 stars review on Apple Podcasts, please hit it now before you forget. Running a podcast is a surprising amount of work, and more reviews converts into a wider range of future guests. This week, I have the privilege of welcoming a remarkable individual whose resilience and strength have shaped her into the inspiring person she is today. Our guest, whose identity remains anonymous for her protection, will bravely share her story of surviving a childhood plagued by both physical and mental abuse. Her voice has been altered to ensure her safety and privacy. Throughout this episode, we will delve deep into her past, shedding light on the harrowing experiences she endured and how she managed to find the inner strength to escape the cycle of abuse. Her story is not just a testament to the indomitable human spirit, but also serves as a reminder of the urgent need for awareness and action against abuse in all of its forms. By sharing her story, our guest aims to empower others who may have experienced similar situations, letting them know that they are not alone and that there is hope for a brighter future. Her resilience will serve as an inspiration for anyone who has faced adversity or seeks to create a more compassionate and supportive society. So, where are you originally from? I don't think Kara's ever told me that.
Elmira, New York.
Oh, is that like north or south?
It's like 30 minutes from like the PA border. It's near Ithaca.
Okay.
Or Binghamton. There's another big city in that area.
When you say Ithaca, I think of The Office.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're about 30 minutes from the PA border and near Corning, New York. If you've ever heard of like Corning Incorporated or Corning Glass.
Yes, I know them. I invested a long time ago in them just because I knew that they were pairing up with like iPhone and yeah. And then I watched Blown Away. Have you ever seen the show Blown Away? They blow glass on Netflix.
Yeah. So they have the Corning Museum of Glass there. We would go like all the time. Corey and I have blown glass like hundreds of times. It's just like kind of normal for us that we forget that other people have not seen like people blow glass, and like you can go get live shows there and you can blow your own glass. We every year like you can go and blow pumpkins and like get your own little pumpkins. So
man, I should hang out with you guys just because I've always wanted to blow glass, and we've looked around here and there's like a place in Maryland and then there's a place near here, but I think it was closed for COVID for a while. Yeah, I think ever since I went to Seattle, there's a Cholula exhibit. You've been to that one?
No, but I heard of it.
Okay. It's great. I mean, I don't, it's probably not as good as the Corning Museum just because it's funny when you think about Corning, it's probably like you think about like all those people who like NASCAR is for like Ford and those people, and they just do that for like fun.
Right.
And Corning's like, we make all our money through like fiber optics and like iPhones and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's actually funny that you said that because it's also like where I'm used to being is like the racetracks up there in Watkins Glen. Like that's where I grew up, is right on Seneca Lake.
Okay. And I guess what was your family dynamic with first we're growing up, I guess?
Yeah. So initially, like when my first like memories, when I think back, we had like this nice house in West Elmira, and it was this beautiful single family home with like a fenced in yard, and my stepdad and myself and my sister lived there, and then my mom got pregnant with my brother. And I don't really have any memories without my stepdad because he came into my life when I was like very young, 2 years old. And the only thing that I can really remember was how much I loved being there. Across the street was my school librarian, and so I would go over to her house and we would sit on her porch and watch the hummingbirds. And we were 2 blocks from my elementary school, and I loved that school and I loved the teachers. And like at the end of the road was the library because we didn't have a library in the school, which was really cool.
Are you joking
Um,
right now? Is this like Matilda?
no.
This sounds like
Yeah,
Matilda.
And it really, like, it's so funny because when I think about like the whole outside picture, I'm like, wow, that would have been such a nice life. But then, like, I remember, like, it was all kind of like a big sham from the outside. It's like this like beautiful thing that I remember so wonderfully, and then inside the home, I remember like I was always like I was like the redheaded stepchild, like
Hmm.
my whole life. Like I was forced. I mean, at 6 years old, I walked myself to school every day. I was not allowed to like be driven, take the bus,
How
not walk
far?
with
How
someone.
far would you say it
I
was?
mean, it's only 2 blocks, but as a 6-year-old,
Yeah,
like by
that's
yourself, that's scary. I remember like some mornings it being like really scary.
well, I can imagine
um,
because sometimes it's super dark too. It's
right,
not like it's lit all the
right.
time.
And then like upstate, Western New York, it's cold in the winter, and so like there would be some mornings where like I would kind of like fuss about needing to walk myself to school, and I knew that like okay, when I got back from school, I'm gonna face the consequences for not wanting to walk to school that morning. Yeah, so um yeah, I remember so my mom's grandmother lived with us, my nana, and I remember, I always was the one who, like, middle of the summer, standing in front of the sink doing dishes while everyone else is outside playing in the pool. And, like, I would always get grounded for the stupidest things. I mean, like, just ridiculous. And I remember my Nana all of a sudden being taken from our home and put into a nursing home. And I had no idea what was happening. And then all of a sudden, um, like a month or two later, we were packing up our house and we were like being forced out of our home. And that's really when things got really, really dark. Um, what had happened, I guess, and I don't really know because it's like foggy and, like when your parents do something wrong and they're narcissists, they don't give you the full, like, straight answer. It's always someone else's fault. But basically, I guess what had happened was my Nana had money. She had lots of money saved up. My mom was awarded the state because when she was about 8 months old, her mother was murdered by her father, who then committed suicide. And
Okay.
so she was adopted by my great grandmother, my Nana. And so she was getting money monthly from the state for doing that.
Mhm.
And she was just putting it away for my mom. And then she had money of her own because she was a teacher for a very, very long time. And
Mhm.
she had created a really nice nest egg. And I guess like my family members on my mom's side thought that they were like siphoning money from my Nana's account without her knowing because she was older.
Yeah.
And so they brought it to the courts, and I guess they were found guilty and were like arrested and it was just this like wild thing. So we moved up to a completely different area. I had to change schools. We moved into this rental property that my stepdad's mother owned. So I just call her my grandma. It was this 2-story that she had split and put like just a piece of wood on the door that could access the upstairs. And then she had installed a full kitchen upstairs. And, so it was this really nice 2-story home, but no one was renting the upstairs. So she was like, why don't you just take the wood piece down and live on both floors? But I guess there were just some electrical issues and that'll come back later too. Um, and that's really when things, like I said, got dark. And I think that was just the fact that like my mom was so used to not working. She
Mhm.
never worked like a day in her life. Um, and my stepdad had to like pick up. He was funny enough the manager at a Blockbuster, and
Really?
then they went under. That was around
Because I worked at Blockbuster. That
mm,
was around like 2007, 2008 or something like that.
ish. Yes, my brother was born in 2001.
Okay.
And then when my stepdad and my mom went through all of those like legal issues, they were like, we can no longer employ you. And then like they were like, you can try to come back another time. And then they went under, and So, like he was trying to find jobs that could pay him the same. They were borrowing a lot of money from my grandmother, and like just he just got really, um, I think, in his own head, but then also he was dealing with just a lot of really deep anger issues.
Hmm.
And so, like, the physical and emotional, like, mental abuse was just, like, really bad. He used to tell this story when he first met me about how I was, like, I mean, 2 years old and, like, just such a huge, like, he told me this on my wedding day, actually, during our father daughter dance. He said that I was a sniveling brat and, like, I was unbearable. And then he said that he had like gotten me under control. He could just look at me and I would just sit down and start crying. And like, so he didn't even need to say anything or like put his hands on me because he just had to look at me and I would just like shut down. And I was like, okay, so that's cue number one. I was afraid of you, not that you had like good management. Um, and then like it was like that my whole life with him. Like he was just like a very big fear-based guy. And he was like he needed to be in control and like needed to feel as though he was being respected, and if he felt at all that he wasn't, then that was a big problem. Like if you challenged him at all, like, oh god,
Yeah.
it was awful. So then in that apartment building there were just like time after time after time that I can like remember just so like vividly, like that things just were really not good and just were never going to be good again. Um, you know,
Around what age were you when I guess this started
mm,
happening?
my brother was little when we moved in. He was maybe two, so this was 2004, 2005, so maybe like 9, 10 years
Mhm.
old. Um, yeah, and like it was little things like um, if I he thought I was talking back. I was grounded for like 2, 3 weeks. And for him, grounded is not like, oh, you can't go to a friend's house. It's like you're in full lockdown, like no technology, like don't make a sound. You really shouldn't be coming out and going to the bathroom unless you've asked permission, which sometimes led to other problems. And then that was an even bigger problem. Um, yeah, it was really bad. So one of the times that I can remember, um, first of all, it was around Christmas time because I remember we'd started Christmas morning with my mom like crying at the Christmas tree because my stepdad just we couldn't have like there was not a birthday, a Christmas, and Easter where like we weren't crying because it's like he didn't want anyone else to enjoy anything. And so then I had gotten like a curling iron for Christmas. And so I was in my room and I had plugged it in and I had set like a pillow next to me with a hairbrush on it and like a curling iron. And he walked in and he thought that I had like put the pillow like on too close to the curling iron or on top of it. And so he grabbed the cord of the curling iron and yanked it so hard out of the wall it ripped the whole plug out, like everything. It ripped all of the electrical. I mean, he had yanked it hard. And right outside of our room was the dining room, and it was like wood floors, but it had like a coating on it.
Mhm.
And he grabbed me by my ankle and he dragged me into the dining room with the curling iron in hand. And like there still to this day probably are claw marks across the floor from like where I was dragged. And between his one hand and then the curling iron, he just went to town, like one hand after the other. And then when I finally had like gotten away from him and had backed myself up against the wall, I pulled my knees to my chest, and my mom was standing in the corner crying like she usually was because she never said anything about it. Um, he grabbed the curling iron and pressed it up against my knee, And he was like, you could have killed the whole family. And then he sent me to the upstairs part of the apartment complex, um, which, like I said, there was no electric, so there was no heat, there was no running water up there, and it's the middle of winter in New York. And he sent me up there, and that's where I was grounded for 2 weeks. And so, we're on winter break. I didn't even have the solace of going to school at that time.
Mm-hmm. So you're
And it
basically
was
all by yourself, and there's nothing upstairs.
right. So, and it was like that often. Anytime I would get grounded, there was this family friend group of ours that was my stepdad's friends from high school. They still are like such good friends of mine. And when we would go to their house, if I were grounded, I'd have to stay in the corner, and we'd have to do like nose and toes. I don't know if you know what that is, but my nose would need to be touching the corner, and both of my big toes would need to be touching the big corner.
It sounds familiar, but no, I haven't heard that explained. No.
Yeah. So if we were out anywhere and we were grounded, like anywhere, we would have to do that. And there would be times where we'd be at this friend's house. I mean, you know how it gets when you're there with your kids. Like you just play and you're chatting with your friends. It could be hours. And I would be standing there for like hours on end. And then sometimes we'd end up staying the night, and he would say, like, okay, well, you can sit down in the corner and like sleep. Um, and so like there would be like steam all built up on the corner, like from condensation from
Yeah.
my breath. And I would be standing there for 7 hours straight. Um, and honestly, I would prefer that sometimes to like what I knew could be happening. So yeah.
The worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I could go like on and on about all of like the physical abuse, but thankfully it seemed, I mean, there are only 2 moments that I can remember where my siblings got it worse than I did. One of the times I remember my stepdad was in their room, spanking my sister. I don't even know if you can call it that, because it really wasn't much.
Spanking is a nicer way to say it, I guess.
Yeah. And I remember it stopped finally, and I was like, oh God, it's over. And all I hear is, you need to get me the lotion because her skin is splitting. And like, then he kept going. He lotioned, I guess, and kept going. And then my brother was young, and he pissed my stepdad off. And my stepdad, who is a 6'3", 400+ pound man, he's not a small guy.
You say 400 pounds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He punched my brother in the chest, like dead center in the chest.
Wow.
Took the wind right out of him. And thankfully that was all that happened, because just a little bit over or up, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, his arm must weigh like 60 pounds. And if he's 6'3" coming down with gravity, I mean, that's very lucky then.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's down on the ground, winded, obviously. My stepdad is still going, get up, you're so ridiculous, and so that's what it was like all the time. And I don't really ever remember when it stopped, like the physical abuse stopped. I just remember like it was just like the constant fear of anything. Like he would, like I had his footsteps in the house memorized.
It was eggshells, basically,
all the time.
And you kind of knew you had a lane that you felt like you had to stay in, and you knew,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I don't understand. I don't understand how that is, but for some reason, I understand that mentality in my head, where it's like, you know exactly what's. I mean, my dad had a temper, but not to that level. But you knew the triggers. You knew what really set them off, and you knew what never to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it got to the point where it was like, yeah, you knew the triggers, but like, surprise, here's a new one today,
Yeah, external stuff from work, where they just come primed, like no matter what you do.
Exactly. And I think it all really culminated. the apartment building that we lived in was just literally kitty corner. Like you had to walk down the street and then down another street just a little bit, and my grandmother lived there, so it was not far from her home.
Mhm.
And so we eventually needed to move in with her because it got so bad. So we moved in with her, which ended up being kind of like a saving grace, I think, because my grandmother would have never allowed that. Um, and so that's, I think, kind of where it tapered off just a little bit. But during that time, my stepdad had to go to the doctor for something and realized that he had a testosterone deficiency, which
Very surprising on paper. Well, not
It
even on
is.
paper, based on what you've told me so far.
it is. But one of the big, I guess, like symptoms or side effects of that can be like a really big temper. And so
Really?
yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's what I was told. I never
Wow.
followed up with my own research, but he had to get every, like once a month, he had to get shots in his thigh for a long time. I don't remember like how long, um, but yeah. So, and then once that started happening, I noticed that like I think all of the physical like abuse kind of stopped. But even now, like he's very manipulative and like narcissistic. And so I genuinely think that he has like the narcissistic personality disorder. Because that's the only thing that I can think of to like having gone through what I went through, still, if I were to bring it up, have it be turned back on me and make me feel like I'm the guilty one. Like so yeah, and there and finally, at one point, so we're living with my grandmother. My let's see, what my freshman year, like between my freshman and sophomore year, my stepdad and my mom decided that they were going to split up. Um, things just like weren't working, and I was like, okay, this is a new start. Like, it'll be fine.
Things weren't working.
Yeah, I don't know if you
You
pick
said
up on
sophomore
it.
year of high school or college?
yeah, high school.
Oh, okay.
So-
So that's, I mean, that's at least good news.
Yeah,
We'll see.
Well,
so they couldn't afford to not live in the same home though. So my stepdad stayed upstairs where our bedrooms were, and then my mom moved downstairs. Um, and so my stepdad then moved my mom's best friend in.
Okay.
and
They started to date, and my mom, I mean, she hadn't been single since I was little. And
Mhm.
so she kind of, I guess, started sowing the wild oats. So like if they weren't already like childish enough and not doing their jobs enough, like I had to really pick up the slack even more.
Yeah.
So like, I was the one like cooking dinners and making sure that like all the laundry was done, all homework was done
For your
bedtime,
brother and sister, right?
yeah, getting them up in the morning. um
Because they're in elementary
Yeah.
school at this point. Maybe one
Yeah.
of them's in middle
Mhm.
school.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I don't even like it was just kind of like, yeah. And so I was like a really bitter, like I was not a fun sister because I was like just
Yeah.
doing everything else. I was working with my grandma so that we could have groceries, and she worked the overnight shift at Walmart. She worked there for like so long, like 30 plus years. Um,
You're like
so
a real version of Fiona from Shameless, basically.
kind of, yeah.
Except for
and
not 5 other kids, but
Right,
still.
exactly. And thankfully there was no substance abuse.
I mean,
Yeah.
When I think of like the silver linings, I think like, okay, there was no substance abuse,
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny for a lot of people when they're in bad situations. That's the best way to keep going, is it could always be worse.
right. Yeah. And I always wonder, like, I'll think to myself and I'm like, yeah, I had it like really rough, like, where I'm talking to my therapist and I'm like, but maybe I'm like making it worse in my own head. Like, maybe it's not as bad as like I thought it was. And my therapist was like, I think you're mistaken. Like, that's not what you endured was not good in the slightest. Like,
Does your therapist say that just because it's been so long that it's just like out of your head, or if you've kind of pushed it, like you try not to think about it at all anymore?
I think that my not problem, but like what I've done kind of to pad it for myself is like I I make jokes about it a lot. I'm sure like maybe Kara has told you a little bit where I'm like, we'll be in the middle of something and I'll be like, yeah, just like when, this is happening and everyone like pauses and is like looking at me worrisome and they're like, that's, are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
do you need a moment to go into the closet and cry? And I'm like, guys, it's funny. Like, and they're like, that's not funny. So I think that that's kind of like what I've done. And it wasn't until like around the time Corey and I got married that I started having like PTSD, like flashbacks for things. And that's really what triggered me to go to therapy because I was like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. Like it would start off small, like we would be like play wrestling, like whatever. And there was a time where he had like pinned my arms down and he was like, yeah, I won. And I like went into like a full blown like panic attack, like because that was like one of the things that my stepdad did. He was bigger, he was stronger, and he used to do this thing where he would like teach us self-defense, where he would do those things, where he would like climb on top of us and pin us down.
Just
and,
let people know she did quotation marks at self-defense.
Yeah, he like pin us down and hold us down, and like there were times where he would like hold blankets and sheets over our heads and our faces, and like if I ever just like stopped like fighting, he would get so angry and he'd be like, "You never stop fighting. Like you don't ever stop fighting. Like you always keep going." And I'm like, I'm a 12-year-old girl, and you are a 400-pound man. Like I don't care how hard I keep going. Like I can't do that.
Did you have any broken arms or feet or anything like that?
No, but there was a time in fifth grade, or no, fifth grade, where so this lets you know like where my mentality was. I was more afraid of sharing with them that I was having a hard time in science and had failed a test than like coming to them and saying, I'm having a hard time, like I failed this test, like I'll try harder. So I forged my mom's signature in it because when you failed a test, you had to provide like parental signature. And so my teacher called my dad. And so when I got home, that was one of the worst times that like I received a spanking, again, quotation marks around spanking. I mean, I had bruises from like, my shoulders down to like the backs of my knees. And I went in the next day and couldn't sit down. And I confided in a friend who sat around me that like I was mad at my teacher because like she got me like spanked. And so my teacher took me down to the nurse and I made my teacher cry because this is back when like they had to take picture documentation of things. And so I, so embarrassing, and to strip me down to like my underwear. And my teacher saw it and had to like leave the nurse's office because she was crying. I mean, because I was just bruises like all the way down. And that was one of the first times that CPS was called. But my stepdad was so like manipulative that every time nothing came of it because he would be like, do you want to go and live on the streets? Because that's where you're going to end up. No one wants you. Like, who wants you? No one wants you. Like, they're not going to take you. Like, you're going to end up nowhere. So we had our kitchen, and then there was a stairwell that had a door to it. And so whenever they would come, he would sit on the stairwell and the door. And if you said anything, which is so funny because like they're there because you're being abusive, but if you said anything about the abuse, you were going to get it. And so we learned like very quickly like what to say and who to ignore and like what questions to answer in certain ways. So I mean, in my life, I remember 3 distinct times that CPS was called and came to do welfare checks, but it could be more than that. And I just kind of tuned
I mean, you were a
out.
kid. Like,
Yeah.
I would be surprised if you could remember every time that.
Yeah. And you would think after like time number 2 that they'd be like, all right, well, something's off here. Like,
Yeah, you think they would have the bruises, you know what I mean? I'm sorry, the pictures of the bruises, and
I know.
yeah. Like
I know.
how did you get, because did you have any stairs? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
how do you explain the bruises? Like,
I know. And I think because at the time we did have stairs down to our basement. And I think I honestly don't even remember how we got out of that one because, yeah, like I mean, when it's that severe, I think what other explanation could there be?
Yeah.
And when you go to school to be a teacher, like I took a whole class about, well, a whole section of a class maybe about how to report to CPS and what signs to look for, and it's like all of the bruising on soft tissues that don't make any sense, on shins and elbows and stuff like that. Like, that
Yeah.
makes sense, but it's like, how are you going to get the bruise there? You know?
Yeah. It's like when you fall, you land on your hands, you land on your knees, you land.
Mhm.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rough points, and then it's like when I'm walking with Kara. This obviously sounds bad, but it's like when you hold your loved one, it
Mhm.
looks abusive from the elbow to the hand.
Yeah.
But as soon
Yeah.
as sorry, no, that's wrong. Sorry, from the elbow to the shoulder, it looks
Yes.
abusive.
Yeah.
But from the elbow to your hand, it looks completely fine. It's just
Right.
it's just funny how like 2-inch area matters.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, surprisingly, like no broken bones. I had stitches, but for all accidental, like true accidents.
Yeah.
I think that was like one of the things like my stepdad joked about too, is like that whole like joke about your like when you're beating your wife, you don't like break bones because you still need her to clean and stuff.
I
I
haven't
don't
heard that
remember.
one, but
Yeah, like it was something like that. That was like a running joke in their friend group. And it's funny because I talk a lot about my stepdad, but like I hold my mom kind of more accountable, I think, because my stepdad, like to this day, he is like, not that I can take back any of it because it was not great. And it's interesting the way that your mind can make excuses or like heal things. And I think that a lot of that is fear based because I still would never say any of the things that I need to say to him because he proved to me a few years ago that he still is that same like narcissistic person, but he is a different person than he was, and he realizes that a lot of what he did was very, very wrong. And he has like talked to me briefly about it, but definitely not in detail.
I'm guessing he's not in therapy.
I don't think so. No. Um, but there was a time when, so my father came back into my life when I was 14.
Man.
Yeah, missed a lot. And one of the questions that I had asked was like, where were you? Like, why didn't you come back? And they both tell different stories. My mother says that he just didn't want me. And so he just decided to go and live a completely different life and just leave me behind. But my father says that like he would try to come and do visitations and he would try to see me, but my mom would not show up to the visitations, or she would make excuses to why she had to cancel like that very last minute. And he said that the very last time that he tried to come and visit, he brought my stepmom so that she could meet me. And my stepdad stayed on the front porch, and my mom came down and was like, she has a new dad now, like she doesn't need you. And that he was like, okay, fine. To which I countered with like, okay, well, I've been calling and writing letters for the past, like, since I could write and speak for myself. So, like, where were you then? And he says he never received any letters. So I'm wondering if, my stepdad and my mom even sent any of the letters, or I don't know. So I confronted my mom about the varying stories and just said, why are the stories like so different? Like I just don't understand because both sound plausible, but for my own closure, like I just need to know. And she called my stepdad, and my stepdad called me. And this was right before my wedding, so the summer of 2019. And he was like, have I ever talked to you about perspective? And I said, hello to you too. Like, how are you? And he was like, have I ever talked to you about perspective? And I was like, probably. Why? Like, and he goes on about how like one event can have multiple different perspectives, and about how not one perspective is the right or wrong perspective. It's just about like varying perceptions of like how things happened. And then he goes on to talk about how like I'm sure people who endured 9/11 all have different perspectives of how it happened and all that. And so I left the phone call very like confused, and it was almost like a threat, like, we're done talking about this. And I was like, okay, so I'm not going to get any answers from that arena. And like I said, with my mom, when my stepdad and her split, she went on to sow her wild oats. And what I mean by that is every morning at 5 a.m. when I was waking up, because my grandma was getting home and we were like trading off jobs, you know, she was getting home from work and I was getting the kids up for school. So my grandma was making us breakfast and I was packing backpacks. My mom would have a different dialogue leaving her bedroom every morning, but she never got that for us. Like a guy would be leaving and I'd be like, grab a cup of coffee on your way out, I guess. You know, like it was like every morning.
I mean,
And
at least
then-
you had your grandma though. I mean,
Yeah.
I hate
Again,
to say
silver
that, but
lining.
yeah,
No, 100%. She was like the only reason that I made it through high school, because in that same time, my mom started dating this guy, and my grandma was like, no, he cannot come and live with us. You know, like, I'm not paying for all these people to be in and out of my home. No. And so she moved out and left us kids there. And then my stepdad found like a better job opportunity in like 2 hours away. And so he moved out and left us there. And so we were there and it was like, okay, well, what about it? Like the kids? Well, it's better for you to have stability there. And while I agree with them, I was like, okay, but again, that put all of the weight back on me because my grandmother worked overnight. She was not awake during the day. So I would, you know, she would get home, we would do our morning stuff together. When I got home, it was my responsibility. I ironed her work pants. I did all of like the cooking, all of the dishes, all of the laundry to get us ready. My grandma would wake up, have dinner with us, and then she would go to work and I was home alone with 2 kids for the night.
And like that's
what was your life like outside of school then? Did you hang out much with friends?
I had a small friend group that kind of support, but they knew nothing. Even Corey knew nothing for a very, very long time, because I was just so embarrassed about it. And it wasn't until so my parents decided that they were going to split between my freshman and sophomore year. And
I have a quick question. What would you
Yeah.
say if people wanted to come over?
I did have a friend who came over at one point, and she never came back. And this was when I can't remember if they had split up or not, but our home was not. I mean, it was old. It was an old home. My grandma's parents built it.
Mhm.
So it was old and it was built, you know, back when it was, you know, insulation was not really like a big thing. So like it was falling apart. The electric work was shoddy.
Did you run up?
So
I know you said there was a basement. Did you were you fast up those basement stairs?
yeah.
If it's that, okay. Because I mean,
yeah.
I was a firm believer that there was a person always behind me.
always.
After 6 p.m., 7 p.m., you run up the stairs and you're like, if I don't run as fast as I can, that person's
They're
going to
gonna get me.
And they
Yeah.
haven't caught me yet. So
Yeah, so we're
sorry, keep
fast enough.
going. Yeah,
No, yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
No, that so in the basement is where we had our laundry. And again, it was my job to do laundry. And there was like the finished part of the basement. And by finished, it was a very loose term, which just meant that they had cemented the floor on one side and then the other side was all mud floor.
And the fixtures were just light bulbs.
Yeah.
Or not even light bulbs. There was
No,
dark
they were
areas.
There were dark areas, yeah, that were not lit up at all, or you had to like walk over and pull
Yeah.
switch.
And then sometimes you
And-
pull it too hard, breaks the light bulb, and then
Yes.
you don't come down for like 3
At
days.
all. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And we lived right next to a creek on one side of us and the woods on the other side.
I thought you were going to say a graveyard.
No, that was up the street. But the spiders that we would get down there in that basement were something else, like full-size tarantulas.
Yeah, you're talking about the ones that whisper, and then as soon as you
Yes.
poke them, the eggs start to spread out or
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Like the spider itself is the size of your entire hand, fingers included. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're like, "This is my home now,"
And you're like,
you could have it, you know.
I know you love Halloween, so that's probably why that basement.
It's that basement, yeah. And so between when my parents decided to split up, I was like, I genuinely cannot see my life getting any better. You know, they're splitting up. My responsibilities are somehow getting harder. I don't know how I can keep doing this. And so I started planning suicide. And so like I started like planning it, like, figuring out what I needed to do. I had figured out like, I mean, my great grandfather was like a handsy guy. So like in the basement, we had every tool, rope, everything you could possibly imagine needing. So I was like, okay, I have the materials. Where would I do it? I had planned where I was going to do it. Everything. And then that October, I met my husband, and he, because you're in high school, the boys don't care about what you're going through. Like no one knew. So I couldn't. I mean, my friends knew. I was like, oh yeah, my parents are splitting up, and like none of my friends had gone through divorce. So they were like,
that's just the cherry on the cake, not even the icing. That's
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were as supportive as they could be, but none of them had gone through anything that I was going through. And their advice, I was like, none of that is ever going to work because you don't know what's happening and you never will. And I met Corey, and he was in 11th grade, and this 11th grade boy was just so genuinely interested in what was going on in my life. Like the first day that we met, we sat and talked for like an hour and a half, where he was actually asking like genuine questions about my life and giving me advice about divorce because his parents were divorced. And like, I was like, okay, like maybe there is a glimmer of hope. So like, I always tell him like, you saved me. Like you're the one like that kept me here. And so we started to date in 10th and 11th grade.
And you're also married to him now.
Yeah.
I'm just giving that as a reference for people listening.
Yeah, so we will have been married for 4 years in October, but together for 13.
That's great.
On the same exact day, we got married on our anniversary. So yeah, so he started to see like little bits of it, but at this point, the physical abuse had ended, and he was just seeing like the really narcissistic behavior from my mom and my stepdad. And at this time, around the time where they were starting to move out, my stepdad moves in with my mom's best friend who is living with us. He also moves in a 17 or a freshly 18-year-old girl because and I'm putting big air quotes around this, was polyamory. Now, from what I've learned about polyamory since then, this was not polyamory.
Every time I think like you just bring another layer to this. Keep going.
I know. It's like that for the rest of like my whole life. So he moves in this 18-year-old girl, and I'm like 16 turning 17, and I'm like, oh, this is so bad. Like, this is so uncomfortable. I'm going into my senior year. Corey is off at college, and I have to like live with this like all the time. My mom is, a walking saloon with the doors just in and out all the time. My stepdad has moved in this 18-year-old girl, like literally, she graduated high school the year before.
At least you didn't go to your same high school, right? Silver
That's
lining.
True.
Silver lining.
And they're upstairs. There's 3 people upstairs.
With us. Yes.
And then your mom.
Children's bedroom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my bedroom shared a key wall with them.
Okay.
And yeah, and my brother was up there with us too. And like, so my mom's best friend and my stepdad would argue all the time because what they were doing was not polyamory. It was him controlling the situation. And they would have conversations all the time where he would say like, well, if you don't like it, we're done. That's not polyamory. Like that's control over the situation. Like, and he would brag often to anyone who would listen, including me, a teenage girl, about the fact that he took the 18-year-old's virginity. And like, I knew way too much about their private life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like that my whole life, where I knew a lot more than I should about my parents' friends. Like and this is where my mom's struggle with, like my struggle with my mom comes into play, is that like she would take highest bidders from her friends for like me when I turned 18.
Wow.
Yeah. And like she would send pictures of like me in a bikini, or she'd snap pictures of me fresh out of the shower, or she'd take pictures of me changing and send them to her friends.
No offense, but I thought your stepdad was the piece of shit, and your mom is just right behind him or in front. I can't tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I think that's maybe why I have like an easier time being like, okay, I can be cordial, but like not lovey with my stepdad. But I just have cut ties with my mom altogether because she's like continuing the cycle. She moved out, and my sister decided to go with her, and she didn't make my sister go to school. She didn't make my sister like do anything. My sister got pregnant at 17, and she like let her just drop out of school. My sister had like these huge goals. She wanted to go to this big art school in Philadelphia, I think it was, and she is an amazing artist, but she like lost all of that because if you can't go without, a GED, my mom was like, no, she doesn't have to do that. She just wanted to be our friend, not like our parent.
Well, it sounded like she needed a friend. She didn't just want to be a
And
friend.
And I think that is it. And so I spent a lot of time like looking at like why can't I like forgive her and like let things go. But the thing is that she watched a lot of stuff happen and never protected us. And she never saw us as like her first priority ever in any situation. It was always the man that she was with that was like her first priority. And that continued to be true even after she left and I moved on with my life. In college, they didn't believe when I filled out my financial aid paperwork that there was zero income in my household from my parents. So every year they had to fill out additional paperwork to prove, like, no, we really have no income. And then I would need her to fill out just one extra one-sheeter piece of paper so that I could then up my student loans.
And let me guess, you had to forge a paper or two.
I wish that I could have, but I was way too nervous with a legal document.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense. I mean, to be fair, I think if anybody checked, I think they would be like, oh, okay. Yeah. They had like 5 seconds in your world. They'd be like, okay, actually, let's double whatever we were going to give her.
Right. Let's also make it so that it's interest free.
Yeah.
So, and actually, the only reason I even went to college is because of my guidance counselor. Every Monday, we had a running meeting my whole spring semester of my junior year and first semester of my senior year, where I would go in, we would write my college essays together. She would look for every possible grant and voucher so that I could get my SATs paid for. I got all of my college applications free. She took care of everything. She set up tours at colleges for me. She drove me home afterward, like everything. And at one point, she drove me home. She drove to my house one time because my mom was not providing me with any of the information that I needed. And she waltzed into my house and she was like, I need like social security number right now. And my mom just handed it over because like the only reason that she wasn't is because it was a control thing for me.
Okay. I'm impressed she still had your social security number. Is there some reason financially she was getting money for that?
I don't know because still to this day, she has my original social security card. She will not give it to me. She refuses to give it to me. And obviously, like
it's a control issue, it sounds like.
Yes. And as soon as she lost control over me, I became the villain. I went away to college and I started like doing things for myself and I became like the villain. I was the one who was always the problem. I always was like the troublemaker, like, and all I was breaking generational like curses and standing up for myself. But yeah, it was like that all of my childhood.
She ever used the phrase, "You think you're better than me"?
Yes, all the time. And another one of her favorite phrases, my husband cracks up at this one because she says it during every conversation we have. I am your mother.
That's a fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. You don't act like it. You know what I mean? Like you say that, but I got a question before I forget it. So you had this amazing librarian and you had this amazing guidance counselor. Do you think that's why you became a teacher? Because you had such strong supports in school that were better, that basically, obviously they got paid, but they sound like they want to.
Mhm.
Also, did you ever
Yeah,
reconnect
I
with that
needed to be on like
librarian?
constant IV bags, and I was
Oh,
in the hospital for like a whole week, and my mom dropped me off, and I don't remember them ever coming to visit me at all for that entire time. But my first grade teacher, she came by with letters from the kids every day. She would come by and just sit with me for 20 minutes because the hospital was near the school. So, I think I walked them. I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, it was, I think, definitely a huge influence. And I, like, as far back as I can remember, and maybe this is why, is because like all of my teachers were so
Did you get fluid
amazing
in your
that I
lungs or
was
something
like,
like
Yeah.
that?
I can see a better life for myself as a teacher, and like I want to help the kids that are like me, maybe. Um, so as far back as I can remember, yeah, like I've always had really great teachers that have made me want to do the same.
She drive
Like
you
she,
home after too? That wouldn't be surprising after all this.
It was like a bunch of different things because, like you said, I was so excited because I was like, okay, because all I remember in my senior year was that feeling of dread of like, I cannot live the life that they lived. I cannot live food stamps and like worrying how I'm going to buy shampoo for myself for the next time I need it. Like, I can't do that. And
So
it was
what
like
was it
this
like where
overwhelming
you
sense of
were
like
at your point with sophomore,
panic.
senior
But
year?
yeah, at the
What did
same
it feel
time, I was
like
like,
when
but that means that I
you,
have to leave
I
them
guess,
here
started
and they're going to
opening
be staying with my
letters
grandma.
to
And it was
colleges
so
and you
heartbreaking
started getting
because
accepted? What did
my
that
mom
feel
was
like?
out, my stepdad
It's
was out
amazing that
like
you'd be
every single
leaving,
night.
but the
yeah.
bad
I would
thing
catch my
is
brother
you still
having
got your
snuck
brother and
himself
sister
out of
there.
bed
So what was the
and
feelings
Yeah.
going
called my
through your
mom,
head?
and he'd just be sobbing on the phone with my mom. But my grandma was like, you cannot take him because you do not have a stable home for him to be in. He needs to go to school. He needs to make it to school every day. And he needs a place where I know he's going to be eating and like taken care of. And but it was just like so hard to know that I was leaving and that I had no idea what was going to happen while I was gone. But my husband was like, that's also not your responsibility. And if you stay just because of them and you get a 9 to 5 job, you're going to end up in that cycle again. So he was like, the best thing you can do is go to college. And then, if you come back, then you'll have a better job and, you can maybe get custody of your siblings, like whatever. And it was so funny because my mom would open the letters before I even got a chance to. And so like I'd get home and like the letter would be open and I'd be like, oh, okay. But I definitely, because I was struggling with school so much because I had so much else going on, I never put the time into studying or really had the mental capacity to do so. That like I was surprised I even got into any colleges because I was like, how else am I going to get the grades that I need for it? But apparently I did well enough to do it, and I got into all of the schools that I applied to, and I got in through a program called the Educational Opportunity Program, which is a really great program for like low income and like struggle people who struggled with school because you can have a lower SAT score and GPA than what is required by the college. And so I think that that's also another way that I got in. And they were a fantastic program. They provided all like the extra support that you need. Like they bought all of my textbooks for me. And they have like your first like freshman year or maybe even sophomore year of college too, mandatory study hall hours a week. Like they really are in it to like ensure your success at college because they know you're
That's
coming from, yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly. And so this program was like phenomenal. And I met some really great people. They did a whole, the summer before my freshman year, a whole 2 week long mandatory like orientation. It was like an overnight thing. Yeah, because like they showed you where all of the like they showed you how to access all of
That's
your online
so
stuff.
good
They
to
showed
hear.
you
Just
how to study
you hear
like
about
appropriately,
those,
how to
and
take
then
notes
when you hear
appropriately. They
scholarships, you
showed
hear
you
like
how
people who
to
are
like where
like
all the
GPA is
buildings
somehow
were. Like
a
it was
point
like
over 4.0,
Right,
I
and
never would have
like
gotten it
they're in
otherwise,
all
and I
these
wouldn't have known
clubs,
how to
but
navigate
you
Yeah.
never hear the
like
other
I'm
side
not
of
like
it.
I
Nobody
didn't
wants to
go
hear
on
those,
I
but
went on
those
a
are the people who
volleyball
really need
team,
it too. I know
Yeah.
it's awesome to be your parents supporting you like 24/7 and
Right.
you're getting
I
good
have
grades, but
struggled with that a lot.
what
Yes,
about your
Yeah.
where I feel
situation?
like because my husband, lots of people in my life have been like, you should be so proud of yourself. But I'm like, for what? What have I done? And people are like, you've done all of it, right? But it also doesn't feel like
Was
It
that
was
amazing?
I
so
did it because
nice.
I'm like, well, without my guidance counselor, I would have never gotten here. But then my guidance counselor would say like, all I did was help get you there. Like you did the rest. And like I was like, okay, well, I would have never gotten through college if it weren't for my husband because he was a huge support. And he's like, I didn't go to New York. I didn't go to your classes. Like, so I definitely feel that is a big part of it.
At that point, did you feel like you had imposter syndrome? A, B, C, D.
This
We
is
were
just
just
me being
having a
a good person.
relationship with you. Yeah, I was just
Exactly. Right. It's just those things that you like. I was like, okay, well, you guys are doing so much for me, and they're like, no, no, like this is just what your parents should have been doing, or what
I
your
think you
friends would be doing
probably
if you
think
would just
that
let them in.
because
And
from what
so,
you've said,
yeah, even
like
to
you
this
had
day, only
no
one of my friends
support
from my friend
system
group knows
whatsoever,
just a
like
sliver
at
of
home.
what
And
happened. They
just
don't
what
know
they
all of
did
it.
was
But also, like,
probably
a part of me is like,
common
oh
like
yeah, make a lot
support
of jokes
you
about it. And
would
then
have had
another
if you
part of
had
me is
like a
like,
strong
if I
like
were to
system
ever
at
Right.
home.
divulge with
Right.
some
And they were like,
people
yeah,
what
we
truly happened, and
we
like
were just
the like if I went piece by piece as thoroughly as I
obviously these
need
teachers were
to
going above and beyond to
to
help you,
have
but
people
and
Yeah.
understand
Corey was
things,
just
I would make
being an
mistakes. Like
amazing
I would
partner.
hurt them.
Yeah.
And
And
so
it's just
like
Yeah.
a
like
part of me is like, I can't do that. And so that's one of the things I talked to my therapist about. And I was like, but I also feel like, that part of bringing that back, I'm making so much of this up, or I'm exacerbating it. My therapist was like, what makes you say that? And I'm like, well, every time that I bring up an incident with any of my family members, they are like, no, that never happened. Like, you're making that up. And they were like, my therapist was like, to play devil's advocate, they might not remember that that actually even happened because for them, it was another Tuesday afternoon. That was normal. But for you, that was a traumatic event. So that's going to be seared in your brain forever. Yes. Yeah. And that's 100% what they did. So yeah, it's wild. And I often think like to myself that, I'm like, well, my sister had her kids at a young age and she ended up marrying this piece of garbage guy, but they're divorced now. And my brother, he had big goals. He was going to go into the service, and then at a graduation party before he left, he smoked some pot, which I'm like, okay, big deal. But when you're going into basic, they do a drug test, and if you have anything in your system, you're out. And you have to wait a certain
another good
time
word,
period
gaslighting.
to
Yeah.
re-enlist. And so then I'm like, that guilt comes back in where I'm like, if I had just gone back and tried to get custody, if I had just moved back instead of moving straight to Virginia and starting like my own life, maybe I could have helped to make sure that they could have been successful too. And my husband's like, that's not your job. That was your parents' job to do that. And now I feel like my siblings hold a lot of resentment towards me for two things. One is for the way that I had to be the mom, and I was not happy about it as a teenager because it took a lot of my freedoms away, and it took a lot of like the time and energy that I didn't have for myself to do that. Right. And so now I think more my siblings are more understanding about it and have expressed their gratitude for it, which I never expect them to do that anyway. No, I don't really let myself show emotion around them. Yeah, I'm pretty cold, and I'm very cognizant of that. Like my husband has pointed it out that like when my sister falls, he's like, your tone changes completely. Like you just go very flat and very. And I'm like, yeah, because I spent my whole life like crying about everything, like crying about everything in my life that was going wrong. It could go wrong. It was.
Be a
And, like,
teenager.
and I spent forever like being tortured by everyone around me. That like I never want them to see me shed another tear again. Whether it's happy, sad, or otherwise, like it's not gonna happen. They're not gonna see it from me. And also,
Did you
my
cry
sister
or
just
anything when they?
really gets to me
I guess.
because she has
Did you have any
feelings,
of those
like
moments
fears and complaints about my
with them?
mother that I've had for my whole life. But it'll be one of those things where she'll call me sobbing about something with my mother. And I'm like, cut it off. Right. But then like 2 hours later, she's tagging me on a post on Facebook. And I'm like, hey girl, I can't get on board with this. I can't. Like, you know. And my brother, I think he is struggling a lot more with the emotional part. I think he got less of the physical abuse and a lot more of like the mental and emotional abuse from my stepdad. And so I think like he's very self-deprecating. He's very like down about everything. And it's like if you give like an inkling or even a hint of like a less than positive tone in your voice, like, if I pick up the phone and I'm like, hey, what's up? And I'm not immediately like, oh my gosh, hi, how are
Forbid
you?
you say I
He's like,
told you so.
I'm bothering you. I'm just gonna go. I'm so sorry I'm annoying you. And I'm like, oh. So, we each have like our own pieces of like
Yeah.
the trauma. My sister, I guess, struggles from like the PTSD of it all too. I think that the hardest part about it all is just feeling like I don't want to equate it to this at all, but I wonder if it's similar to like survivor's guilt. Like I'm the one who made it like out and has like created this like better life for myself, and they're still there struggling with everything. What if I had gone back? What if I had done that?
Yeah. Hmm.
I know. And if I were to call them and
I
tell
mean,
them like
I feel
I
like
feel
that's
guilty,
normal.
they'd be like, why?
It's hard
And I
not to
know that,
compare where you're
but
at to where they're
yeah,
at. I mean,
it's
you brothers and
definitely
sisters.
like a
It
big
would be
struggle.
crazy if you
And then
didn't
so
compare.
with my
And I mean, Corey's
stepmom and my
100% right.
dad, they
It's
have
just
two
hard to
more
tell
boys.
yourself in your head that,
One that
you know
was
what I mean?
born
Right.
Just like you said,
2 months after I met
you're
him
the
when
one
I
who
was 14.
experienced all that. You know
And
what
I
it feels
think
like.
like that is
And
also a big
I
part
would
of feeling
imagine,
like that
I'm
need
not
and
saying
closure part
you need to
is that
feel
I'm like,
guilty at
well,
all,
it's my
but
stepmom who
like
never
you
got
being
pregnant
happy,
because
you
I
having
struggled with
like
like
an
infertility and
amazing
miscarriages.
husband, an
Yeah.
amazing life, amazing
But I still got
environment.
him
Do you
pregnant.
feel
Would
guilty?
I know him today?
Is
Yeah.
that,
So there's
yeah,
that. And then
I
my
can imagine
Yeah.
that. You should not
youngest
feel guilty
brother was
whatsoever,
I
but
born
know.
nobody's going to be able to tell
July
you
5th, the
that.
same day as my son. Um, the year that I went, the summer between my
Yeah.
senior year and my freshman year of college. So they're like significantly younger than I am. I'm very close with the older one. And the younger one, I remember there was a time where I was like tickling him and he was like, stop. And I was like, tell me I'm the best sister. And he was like, you're not my sister. Because his idea of like a sibling is someone who lives in a house with you. But I was in college, I was a full grown woman. And so like I feel like I have lost a lot of opportunities to be close with my siblings. So when people are like, oh my gosh, you have 4 siblings, I'm like, yeah, I know really nothing about them. Right. So it's hard because like people are always like, oh, well, do you have
Mhm.
family that you can go to, like, you know, with your son? And I'm like, no, you know,
Like,
and that too, you know, my husband has his dad and his brother here, but you know, it's just not the same.
Yeah.
And like every like Mother's Day, Father's Day less so, I think, but Mother's Day hits
Yeah.
hard for me and like has for like a long time. Where I'm like, that whole feeling of like maybe I'm being too hard on her, but then I talk to her and I'm like, nope, I'm not. This is over.
Yeah. Like two of
So
them I don't really know at all, and then the other two I'm more of like a aunt mom type figure.
Yeah.
right. I think it's even harder that like there is no accountability on her end. And so every time that I bring something up, it's always,
Prefer
I'm
not
not
to.
some big monster. I'm your mother. It's that statement over and over again. I was not some awful mother. I did my best. And I'm like, but you didn't. And maybe at some point before you had more freedom without my stepdad, you know, having you in whatever chains you guys had in your marriage. And once you divorced and became like a whole separate evil person on
Yeah.
your own,
It's funny how
like
sometimes
maybe you
the
did try
memories
your
or the
best
time that's
at
passed
some
kind of
point,
like
but
dulls it, and then
there were
the
times where
actual
she would
sharpens
purposefully
the
lie
memories that
to
you
my
had, I
Yeah.
guess.
stepdad about situations that had happened, because I think that when he was able to exert his frustrations and anger that he had inside of him on us, that their relationship was better. So like there was a time where we were talking and I had divulged with her before going to school one morning that like I wish I knew my dad. Like I wish I had met him. Like I wish I knew him. I came home from school and my stepdad was like dragged me in by my backpack and was like, "You need to pack your stuff." And I was like, "What is happening?" And he was like, "Oh, you want to live with your dad so bad? Like, pack your stuff. We're gonna see if he wants you." And he made me call him, knowing he was not going to pick up the phone, and leave a voicemail where I was like, "Can you come and get me?" And knowing that this was going to be a phone call, and he was like, "See, he doesn't want you. He doesn't want you at all." And then he made me call a bunch of other people to see if they wanted me. And no, you know, no one, everyone else was like, "What are you talking about? Do you want to come live with me? Like, what's going on?" And then he'd make me hang up before I would answer. He'd be like, "See, no one wants you. No one else wants you. Like, this is why." And he made me apologize to my mom. And my mom had told him that I had like gone out of my way to say that I wanted to live with my dad and my life would be so much better with my dad. And like, that never happened. And many situations unfolded like that where there another time, you know, when I was in high school, I had asked my mom if I could go to a basketball game for like it was our last away game for that our high school. And I had all the transportation. I just needed to be picked up from the high school parking lot after. And it was going to be later and it was a school night and I was never allowed to do things on a school night. But she said yes. So my stepdad texts me while I'm gone at the basketball game. "Where are you?" And I was like, "I'm at a basketball game, away game." And he was like, "Well, you need to find your own ride home then, because I never said that you could go. And your mom said that she never said that you could go either." If he like questions her but sees that, you know, he's not happy with her answer, she's going to lie about it to be the one that's favored. So that was the way it was like my entire life. And so I'm like, I endured a lot of emotional and physical pain because of that. And she has to be held accountable just as he is. Yeah. So, right. Exactly.
And
No, I appreciate the sentiment, but I think that the best part that has come from all of this is probably just like being able to be more empathetic, because at
Yeah.
the time this was not a positive, you know, silver lining, but I had to take on everyone else's emotions so that I knew how to read the room. It was like, okay, I need to be able to know what is he feeling right now so that I can react appropriately and so that I know like what
How
to
can
say
you
and
grow
how
up
to act.
in a
But
world
now it's made
where
me
your
like
parents
deep
are
and that, and
bending the
I'm
rules
able to
and
just feel
they're
so
basically
strongly
asking,
for
they're
the
acting
people that
just
I
like
care about, who I know will
kids that are
appreciate it.
younger than you.
And so, like, because
Yeah.
of that, I feel
I'm sorry.
for a long time they always used to tease me and make me feel really bad because that was my signature thing. Was I would cry a lot. Like I would, because that's the only thing that I could do to get all of these big feelings that I had out of my body was to cry. So I cried a lot. But now I'm like proud of that because I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling so strongly and I love so hard because I now like know how to feel things that other people need me to feel. You know, like if someone is experienced a loss, I'm gonna feel that loss right alongside of them. Like if someone else is happy because they have just gotten the best thing ever in their life, they're finding out that they're having a baby, whatever. I'm gonna be able to feel that joy just as strongly as they are for them. And like that is the best thing possible for me because I'm able to love the people that I love so deeply. And that is a really special thing. One of the things that my grandma taught me growing up was just that things are things are always going to get better if you make them better. So like while it might not always have been the easiest thing in the world, it was always like, yeah, that's really hard. What's our game plan? And so I
Oh,
think
that's
that that's
awesome.
something I want to continue doing with
So
my children is just
for my last
remembering to
question,
acknowledge that things are hard
what
for
is
them
something
because
that
I think that
I'm going to
interestingly
say your
enough, a
grandma
lot of
did
like my
that you'd
sisters
like to
specifically
pass on? It could be like a
it's like
tradition
jaded about
or
things with her kids. Like, oh, you
value,
think that
anything
that
you
was
think.
hard? Well, my childhood was
And
harder.
this
Yeah,
can,
it
you can
was,
add
but
as
her
many to
childhood
this
was
as you
not.
want.
It's not the
Some things that
same.
you kind of want
And so
to
acknowledging like
stress
that
with
that hard
raising
is
your
hard for
children.
them. But what's our game plan? Where are we going to go? Because like that was my thing with my grandma. You don't cry about things for long. Cry about them. Get it out. Where are we going? What are we doing? And so that's something that's like just really important to me to remember for myself, but also for my children because like their childhood is not thankfully going to be anything like what I experienced. And because of that, I'm going to be able to say to them, this is so hard for you, but what are we going to do about it? What can I help you do? What do you need to do on your own that I need to support you with? And so like that is going to be really like important to me. And that's another thing that my grandma did too is that no matter what, like she was there. You know, she struggled because she was providing for children that weren't her own, and she was there every time. She bought my prom dress for senior year. She drove me to college and picked me up every break and every time. She figured it out. She was there at my college graduation. She would have been there for my master's graduation had she been, well enough. She would have been there for my son's birth. Um, had she not passed away literally the week before. And she was just always there. If I needed her, if I called her at any time, she was going to be there, which was all I could have asked for in a home where that was not going to be the case for my parents. So I think, that alongside of it is just that silently or audibly, whatever my kids need, I'm gonna be there no matter what. Um, and then something smaller that just is something that my kids will know how to do is every year, Christmas and Thanksgiving, we would make pies from scratch, like crust and all. And so that'll be something that we do every year. I did not make them this year because it was just really raw, fresh. But we're gonna do that every year. Okay. 2 weeks. Yeah.
I don't want to buy one if you already have one. I have the perfect gift then.
Okay.
I'll talk to Kara. See
Okay.
if you've ever mentioned it, because I want it to be a surprise. Because that's going to be, it's like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. Okay, I'm trying to gauge and the other big thing is try to do as much work as possible for the party.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you know our story, but the last one we did, I was up till like 2 a.m. blowing up like a 90 balloons. But I mean, you're only going to have one of those, or I mean,
Yeah.
obviously one of those for that child.
One for the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was great answers, and thank you so much for sharing all that stuff. I can obviously tell that you've taken a long time to think about this stuff, and it's just amazing. I have no words, just because Kara's told me that you had a rough childhood, but just to hear all the stuff that you've gone through, I would just think that like if people could see your emotional strength, you would just have like huge muscles. You know what I mean? Like all the stuff that you've gone through. It's just amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm proud of that.
And it's funny because I have friends who've gone through like they've lost like both of their parents at like early ages and stuff like that. Like early enough that
without
they
all the
were
trauma.
cognizant of like what was going on and stuff like that. And they're some of the toughest people I know, but also the most like emotionally like
I find just talking about it,
mature
it's
people,
more
you know what I mean?
thoughtful,
Like,
yeah.
and
you know,
they might
just to
not
be
like you would
we're
think
not
like for some
talking about
stuff
this.
they would
And
cry,
then
but then other stuff
then turned into
just like
jokey
break
about this,
down.
but people are
And
concerned 'cause the jokes are very
breakdown
dark.
is
And
not
then,
a correct
you know,
word,
I
but
went to
Right.
and then
know,
I know
like,
you. Yeah.
be able
started
to
experiencing, like, the
relieve, like
PTSD
show
back
what
from,
they're
like, the
feeling.
therapy, and she was like,
And those
all of these
people,
things are
they're
normal
so
responses, but,
strong,
like, you
but they
gotta
had to
deal
go
with
through that
something.
stuff
So,
Yeah.
Right.
to be that
No, I
way.
get it.
You're going to be able to translate all that strength to your child.
That's the goal.
Yeah. But thanks again for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I hope it was fun. I try to at
was.
least make it enjoyable and not stressful for anyone. If you like this week's episode of People More Interesting Than Me, please follow me on Apple Podcasts so you won't miss out on more episodes like these.